All right, so last class we talked about how to find a good sample to represent a population. Once you have your sample, you can go ask them questions. Now the problem is when you ask people questions, you're going to get a lot of different answers. We have to be able to take all those answers and turn them into a summarized number, a number that we can understand and work with. There are two types of numbers we find, average and percent. So first, average is basically when you take a lot of numbers, so something like this, where there's just a bunch of numbers, and then turn it into one number, which is like the middle or the normal number, okay? A percent is when you try and find out how much each answer is, like what percent of the chunk. So for example, if I ask people about like how they get to work, and I want to find out how many each answer is. So maybe these many people say car, this big chunk said they walk, and this big chunk said, I don't know, carpool. Maybe bike. That makes more sense. Okay? So we can say numbers like 30%. 30%, you know what that means. That's like a third, that's a big chunk. Whereas if I had a little sliver here that said like 1% take a spaceship, you know 1% isn't very much. Walk is 50%, you know that's a lot. So it's a way to take it and be able to tell how big of the group chose that answer really quickly. So let's do average first. Okay? The way average works is you're going to take a bunch of numbers. We're then going to find the total. The total for this, I added it all up on my calculator earlier, was 124. These were the results of a quiz, so I want to know how my class is doing. So in total, the whole class got 124 questions right. Cool. But I want to know what that means for each kid. Like, what is a normal mark for a kid in this class? So then what you need to do is divide it by the number of people. Number of people, number of responses, whatever. In this case, there's 18 kids. So I'm going to do 124 divided by 18. Okay? So when I do that on my calculator, I get, what's that, like 6.8? Okay? What that means, that number represents the average mark in the class. So for these kids right here, these ones that were getting 10, or even this kid getting 9 and 8, they're above the average. They're better than the average. A lot of kids were getting like 6 and 7. Oops, sorry, let's do this. 6 and 7. These kids are doing average. They're doing okay, right? And then obviously when I look at these 3 and 4, those two kids are way below average. Those two kids obviously I need to look at because they're having issues. That's why we do average, so we can find out where that middle is and use it to make appropriate guesses. My guess is if there was an absent kid, just say there was one kid who didn't write the test. If I had to guess what that kid would get when they write the test, I would guess something around 6.8, maybe like 6 or 7, because that's where the normal kids fell in the class. Now, sometimes you're going to get lots of answers, word answers. So let's say IKEA, like they sell couches and stuff. They write down how many of each color they sold every day. So they sold red, black, white, blue, and gray couches. This is how many they sold of each. Now, we don't want to do average here because the average wouldn't really make any sense because we're not looking at the numbers just specifically. We're looking at words, red, black, white, blue, gray. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the percent. What percent is each of these numbers? The first thing you need to do is find the total. So again, to find the total, you add all these numbers up. I end up getting 125. Then, to find the percent, we're going to find the percent for each and every type of answer. The way we do percent is we do the amount divided by the total. So in this case, the amount was here. Let's do it with blue. So the amount was the 20. The total is this 125. So we're saying that out of that whole 100%, 20 out of 125 answered red or bought red couches. So when we actually do that math, 20 divided by 125, we also have to multiply by 100%. If you don't, you'll end up with like weird decimals like this, which doesn't really make sense. So when I do that, 20 divided by 125 times 100% gives me 16%. 16% on a chart, I know that's something like that. That's how many people bought red couches. So not a huge chunk, but not like a 1% either. We do the same thing for the rest of the charts. So we do 10 people divided by the total times 100%. That would give me This one gives me 8%. So it's easy to see it's smaller than this one. What's this, black? This could be a skinny little piece. Not very big. 15 out of 125 times 100. That gave me 12%. So again, not too huge. And then we get to the blue. So we got 80 divided by 125 times 100%. Gives me 64%. So looking at that one, it's huge. I knew 80 was a big number, but it's hard to say exactly how big it is. But 64%, that's more than half. That's going to be something like this. That's going to be the blue right there. And then gray was 0, so it's not on the chart at all, right? And then white was 12%. Let's make it look like this. So red, black, and white. So when we have these percents, oh sorry, this was 0%. When we have these percents, it's a lot easier to figure out that, wow, 64%, that's a huge amount. Whereas these two, 8, 12, and 16, they're not as big. They're not nothing, but they're not very big. This helps us in two ways. One, if we had one more person, let's say that tomorrow I had one person come in. If I had to guess, what color do you think they'll probably buy? My guess is blue, because that was the most likely, because look, 64%, that's more than half. It's possible he'll buy a different color, but that's the best guess. The other thing you can wonder is that tomorrow, if we sold 100 couches, we would want to say, well, how many were each color? The way we can do that is we can say, well, let's say how many were blue. We do 100 times 64%, which you can, there's buttons on your calculator you can do, or times 0.64, okay? And it's going to say, oh, well, there's going to be 64 blue couches tomorrow. The idea with this is that it can help us make predictions about the future, and it can also let us know how many people are saying different things. Now, the big question is when to use each. When do you use average? When do you use percent? Percent is whenever you have a total. So the other way of thinking of it that makes it a little easier when we're doing surveys is, what are people saying? If you're going to ask people a question, you're asking this guy, if his response is going to be a number, you're going to do average. If you're going to ask a person and their response is going to be a word, you're going to do percent. Think of it this way. If we ask, let's do some examples. We'll say like the time to get to school. If he says 12 minutes, I'd be able to find the average time it takes if I ask all those different people. If I ask people, how do you get to school? And they said, oh, well, car or bus or train or whatever, right? Then I could find out what percent is each type of answer. And I could find that on using the skills I used before. That's the basic rule of thumb. If it's numbers, it's average. If it's a word answer, it's percent. Let's do one just to check to see if you get it. Let's ask people, favorite subject. So if I ask people, what's your favorite subject? Think, are you gonna calculate average, or are you gonna calculate percent? Think for a sec. Okay. People's answers for this are gonna be words. They're either gonna say math, English, history, socials, whatever, but we're gonna be able to figure out percent. What percent of the population like each different type of subject? Obviously math's gonna be the biggest, like 90% of people love math, right? Something like that. Now, if I ask the question, let's do one more check. I ask people, what's your best mark? I don't say what class, I just say what's your best mark, like what percent? Are people gonna do average, or are we gonna figure out percent from these answers? We would probably do average for this one, because if we ask people what's your top mark, they're gonna say something, oh, well, my best mark is actually like 79, I'm doing decent this year. We can use all those numbers and calculate the average, so we can figure out what are most people's best mark. Now, if we ask them again, what subject do you get your best mark in, that would be percent. So the basics is Should we use average or percent? And when we use average, we're figuring out what one normal person would say or would think or would have. If we're doing percent, we're figuring out what chunk of all of the answers gave that one answer we're looking at, like blue couches or whatever. And that's it.